In a small, quiet town nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, life moved at a slow, predictable pace. The streets were lined with old oak trees that swayed gently in the breeze, and the air carried the faint smell of freshly baked bread from the local bakery. People greeted each other warmly as they passed by, exchanging smiles and polite nods. On the surface, it seemed like the perfect place to live, a haven of peace and simplicity. But beneath this serene exterior lay simmering tensions, hidden cracks in the foundation of the community that threatened to break open at any moment. The town had always been divided along invisible lines, lines drawn not just by geography but by race, class, and history. For years, these divisions remained unspoken, buried under layers of politeness and routine. Yet, every so often, the cracks would widen, and the ugliness lurking beneath would spill out into the open. This was one of those times. Marcus Johnson, a tall, muscular man in his early 30s, walked home after finishing his shift at the mechanic shop where he worked. Marcus was well liked in the neighborhood. He had a reputation for being kind, hardworking, and generous. Many people relied on him to fix their cars at affordable prices, and he never hesitated to lend a helping hand when needed. Despite his tough exterior, Marcus had a gentle soul. His deep brown eyes reflected a lifetime of struggles endured with grace and resilience. But not everyone saw Marcus the same way. To some, he was just another black man who didn't belong in their world. In their eyes, his presence was an intrusion, a reminder of changes they didn't want to accept. These feelings of resentment festered quietly, bubbling just below the surface until something, or someone, pushed them over the edge. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets, Marcus decided to take a shortcut through a narrow alley. It wasn't something he usually did, but he was tired and eager to get home. The alley was dimly lit, the flickering street lamp doing little to chase away the darkness. As he turned the corner, he heard soft footsteps behind him. At first he thought nothing of it, assuming it was someone else heading home. But then came the whispers. Low, menacing voices filled with hate. Marcus slowed down, his instincts kicking in. He glanced over his shoulder but couldn't see anyone clearly. The shadows swallowed everything, making it impossible to tell how many people were following him. Still, he kept walking, hoping to reach the end of the alley before anything happened. But fate had other plans. Suddenly, 4 figures emerged from the darkness, blocking his path. They were part of a notorious gang that had been terrorizing the town for months. Their leader, a wiry man named Kyle, stepped forward, his lips curled, into a cruel smirk. His eyes gleamed with malice as he sized Marcus up, taking in his broad shoulders and imposing frame. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the sound of distant traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves. "Well, look what we've got here," Kyle sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "A big guy like you shouldn't be walking, alone at night." Marcus raised his hands slowly, trying to defuse the situation. He didn't want trouble, all he wanted was to go home and rest. "I don't want any trouble," he said calmly, though his heart pounded in his chest like a drum. But the gang wasn't interested in peace. They thrived on chaos, feeding off the fear they instilled in others. With cruel laughter, they lunged at him, fists flying. Marcus tried to defend himself, using his strength and agility to block their blows. But there were too many of them, and they fought dirty, aiming for vulnerable spots without hesitation. One punch landed squarely on his jaw, sending a sharp pain shooting through his skull. Another connected with his stomach, knocking the wind out of him. Despite his best efforts, Marcus couldn't hold them off forever. Blow after blow landed on his body, each one more brutal than the last. He stumbled backward, his legs giving way beneath him. Finally, he collapsed to the ground, blood trickling down his face and mixing with the dirt. The attackers reveled in their dominance, kicking him mercilessly while hurling racial slurs that cut deeper than any physical wound. "You don't belong here," one of them spat, his boot connecting with Marcus's ribs. "This is our town." Through the haze of pain and anger, Marcus gritted his teeth, refusing to give them the satisfaction of hearing him cry out. He curled into a protective ball, shielding his head with his arms as the assault continued. Each kick felt like a hammer striking steel, leaving bruises that would take weeks to heal. Yet, even in his agony, Marcus couldn't help but wonder why they hated him so much. Was it truly about race, or was it something else entirely? Just when it seemed like the beating would never end, one of the gang members noticed something unusual, a tattoo peeking out from under Marcus's rolled-up sleeve. It was intricate, depicting a serpent coiled around a dagger, its eyes gleaming menacingly even in ink form. The sight sent chills down the attacker's spine. "Wait!" he shouted, grabbing Kyle's arm mid-swing. "Look at this!" The gang froze, their expressions shifting from triumph to confusion. Kyle leaned closer, squinting at the tattoo. His face paled instantly. "No, it can't be," he whispered hoarsely, his voice trembling with fear. For a moment, no one moved. Then, as if struck by lightning, the gang backed away from Marcus, their bravado evaporating like mist under the morning sun. Without another word, they fled into the night, leaving Marcus bruised and bewildered on the cold pavement. As Marcus lay there, dazed and bleeding, he couldn't understand what had just happened. Why had they stopped? What had made them run, away like cowards? Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up onto his elbows, wincing with every movement. His mind raced as he stared at the tattoo on his forearm. The very tattoo that had caused such a dramatic reaction. Memories began flooding, back memories he had tried so hard to bury. Years ago, before settling in this sleepy town, Marcus had been involved with a powerful underground organization. Known only by their symbol, the serpent and dagger, they operated in the shadows, dealing with matters most people couldn't comprehend. Members were chosen carefully, bound by loyalty and fear. Marcus had joined reluctantly, coerced by circumstances beyond his control. Eventually, he managed to break free, vowing never to return to that life. But the tattoo remained, a permanent reminder of his past. Now it seemed his history had caught up with him. Hours later, Marcus finally managed to drag himself off the cold pavement and stagger back to his apartment. Every step felt like a battle, each movement sending sharp jolts of pain through his battered body. His clothes were torn, his face swollen, and blood had dried in streaks along his arms and neck. The walk home, a journey that usually took 10 minutes, felt endless, as if time itself had slowed down to mock his suffering. Passers-by glanced at him with concern, but Marcus avoided their eyes, unwilling to explain what had happened. He didn't want pity. He just wanted to be alone. When he finally reached his apartment, he locked the door behind him and leaned against it, letting out a shaky breath. The room was small but tidy, filled with simple furniture and a few personal belongings. Photos of his family hung on the walls, smiling faces frozen in happier moments. Marcus stared at them for a long time, trying to steady his racing thoughts. Then, with great effort, he shuffled to the bathroom and turned on the faucet, splashing cold water onto his face. The sting of it brought clarity, or at least enough clarity to realize how badly he'd been hurt. As he cleaned his wounds, Marcus replayed the attack in his mind over and over again. The punches, the kicks, the hateful words, they echoed in his ears like a broken record. But one thing kept standing out. The moment when everything changed. The tattoo. That single mark on his arm had stopped the gang dead in their tracks. It wasn't fear of him or guilt for their actions, it was something else entirely. Something deeper, darker. Marcus rolled up his sleeve and examined the serpent and dagger tattoo more closely. Its design was intricate, almost hypnotic, with every curve and line holding significance. To most people, it might have looked like an ordinary piece of art, but to those who knew its meaning, it was a symbol of power and danger. The organization he'd once been part of used it as their emblem, marking members as untouchable enforcers of their will. Even after leaving that life behind, Marcus had never removed the tattoo. Partly because it was permanent, partly because he thought no one would recognize it anymore. After all, he'd moved to this quiet town years ago, far away from the chaos of his past. Or so he had believed. Now, as he traced the lines of the tattoo with trembling fingers, memories he'd tried to bury resurfaced like ghosts. He remembered the initiation ceremony, the brutal tests of loyalty, the missions that left scars both visible and invisible. He remembered the fear in people's eyes whenever they saw the serpent and dagger symbol, the same fear he'd seen tonight in the gang's eyes. And he remembered why he'd left. It hadn't been easy. Leaving meant risking his life, betraying the very group that had sworn to protect him. But Marcus couldn't live like that anymore. He wanted freedom, peace, a chance to start over. So, he disappeared, severing ties with everyone from his old life. For years he lived quietly, building a new identity as a mechanic, a neighbor, a friend. Until now. The question gnawed at him. How did these men know about the tattoo? Who had told them? And why were they so terrified? The answers eluded him, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Whatever had driven the gang to run away in fear wouldn't stop there. If anything, it would only escalate. Marcus knew too well how ruthless the organization could be. They didn't forgive betrayal lightly. Over the next few days, rumors spread through the town like wildfire. People whispered about the mysterious incident in the alley, speculating wildly about what had happened. Some claimed aliens had intervened, others believed divine intervention saved Marcus. No one suspected the truth, that the tattoo held secrets, darker than anyone could imagine. Despite his injuries, Marcus forced himself to go to work the following morning. He couldn't afford to lose his job, especially not now. As he walked into the garage, his co-workers immediately noticed his condition. His boss, Tom, a gruff but kind-hearted man in his 50s, approached him with a worried expression. "Marcus, what the hell happened to you?" Tom asked, his voice tinged with anger and concern. "It's nothing," Marcus replied, brushing off the question. "Just got into a little scuffle." Tom wasn't satisfied. "This doesn't look like a little scuffle. You need to report this to the police." Marcus shook his head firmly. "No cops. I can handle it." His refusal only fueled more curiosity among his co-workers, but Marcus kept his distance, avoiding conversations and focusing solely on his tasks. By the end of the day, word had spread throughout the shop, and by evening, the entire town seemed to know about the attack. Neighbors stopped by his apartment with food and offers of help, eager to hear his side of the story. Friends called repeatedly, urging him to open up, but Marcus remained silent. Explaining the truth would put innocent people in danger, and he couldn't bear the thought of dragging anyone else into his mess. Instead, he thanked them politely and assured them he was fine, even though he felt anything but. Inside, he wrestled with conflicting emotions. Fear, anger, frustration, and a growing sense of inevitability. He knew the gang wouldn't stay away forever. Neither would the shadowy figures from his past. One night, as Marcus sat alone in his dimly lit living room nursing a cup of coffee, there was a knock at the door. Startled, he set the mug down and grabbed a baseball bat leaning against the wall before cautiously approaching the entrance. Peering through the peephole, he saw Kyle, the gang leader, standing outside. Behind him stood two of his accomplices, their heads bowed in shame. Marcus hesitated, unsure whether to open the door or call the police. But something in Kyle's demeanor made him reconsider. There was no arrogance, no malice, only fear. Reluctantly, Marcus unlocked the door and cracked it open slightly. "What do you want?" he demanded, gripping the bat tightly. Kyle swallowed hard, his hands raised, in surrender. "We need your help," he blurted out, his voice trembling. "They're coming for us." For a moment, Marcus didn't respond. He studied the men's faces, searching for any sign of deception. But all he saw was genuine terror. Slowly, he lowered the bat and stepped aside, allowing them to enter. They shuffled in awkwardly, looking around the modest apartment as if expecting danger to leap out at them at any second. Once inside, Kyle explained everything. After fleeing the alley, the gang had gone into hiding, terrified of what they'd witnessed. They didn't understand the full significance of the tattoo, but they recognized it as a symbol of immense power. When they reported the incident to their higher-ups, other members of the local gang, they were met with disbelief and ridicule. But things took a turn for the worse when strangers began showing up in town, asking questions about Marcus and the altercation. These strangers weren't ordinary thugs. They were professionals, armed and dangerous. Within days, the gang realized they'd stumbled into something far bigger than themselves. They said we messed with someone we shouldn't have, Kyle admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. They gave us a choice: hand you over or face the consequences. Marcus listened intently, his jaw tightening with each word. He already knew who they were, the organization he'd left behind. Somehow, news of his whereabouts had reached them, and now they were using the gang as pawns to draw him out. It was a classic tactic, one designed to exploit fear and desperation. If Marcus did nothing, these men would pay the ultimate price. Yet stepping forward meant confronting a past he'd worked so hard to escape. "What do you expect me to do?" Marcus asked finally, his tone heavy with resignation. Kyle looked at him pleadingly. "We don't know. We can't fight them alone. Please, you have to help us." Marcus sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. This was the last thing he wanted, to be dragged back into that world. But deep down, he knew he couldn't abandon these men no matter how much they deserved it. They may have attacked him out of hate, but now they were victims too, caught in a web of violence they didn't fully comprehend. "All right," Marcus said finally, his voice firm despite the weight of his decision. "I'll help you, but you're going to have to trust me completely. And if you double-cross me, I won't hesitate to make sure you regret it." The gang exchanged nervous glances but nodded in agreement. They had no other options. With time running out, Marcus and the gang devised a plan to expose the organization's activities to the authorities. It was risky, requiring them to gather evidence while staying one step ahead of their pursuers. Marcus knew the stakes. Failure meant death not just for him but for everyone involved. Yet he also knew this was his chance to break free once and for all. As they prepared for the final showdown, Marcus felt a strange mix of emotions: fear, determination, and a flicker of hope. For years, he'd carried the burden of his past, hiding in plain sight. Now, he had the opportunity to confront it head-on and reclaim his life. Whether he succeeded or failed, one thing was certain: he wouldn't go down without a fight. The days that followed were a blur of tension and preparation. Marcus knew he couldn't face the organization alone, not with their vast resources and ruthless tactics. But he also understood that the gang members were reluctant allies at best, men who had once attacked him out of hate and now relied on him for survival. Trust between them was fragile, built on desperation rather than mutual respect. Still, Marcus pushed forward, determined to turn this dangerous situation into an opportunity to end the cycle of violence for good. He began by teaching the gang how to act strategically, something they clearly lacked experience in. These men were used to brawls in dark alleys, not calculated operations involving surveillance and evidence collection. At first, they struggled to grasp his instructions, their frustration evident in their scowls and muttered complaints. Kyle, in particular, seemed skeptical about following orders from someone he'd once beaten half to death. But Marcus didn't have time for ego or pride. He spoke firmly yet calmly, breaking down each step into simple terms. "You need to think, like hunters," Marcus explained one evening as they sat around a makeshift table in his apartment. Maps, photos, and scribbled notes covered the surface, creating a chaotic mosaic of plans. "Every move you make has to serve a purpose. Don't just react to plan ahead." Kyle crossed his arms, looking unconvinced. "And what exactly are we planning? You haven't even told us who these people are." Marcus paused, his expression unreadable. He hadn't revealed the full truth about the organization, not because he didn't trust them, but because he feared it would scare them off completely. The gang already looked uneasy. Learning the scale of the threat might send them running for the hills. Yet Marcus realized he couldn't keep them in the dark forever. They needed to understand what they were up against if they stood any chance of succeeding. "They're not just some random thugs," Marcus said finally, his voice low and steady. "They're part of a network, a powerful one. They deal in secrets, threats, and control. If they find out I'm here, they won't stop until they've silenced me and anyone connected to me." The room fell silent. Even Kyle, who prided himself on being fearless, looked shaken. One of the other gang members, a burly man named Rick, leaned forward nervously. "So, what does that tattoo mean? Why did they freak out when they saw it?" Marcus hesitated, then rolled up his sleeve to reveal the serpent and dagger symbol. "This isn't just ink," he said quietly. "It's a mark, a warning. To those who know its meaning, it says I was once part of something bigger than all of us. Something dangerous." Rick swallowed hard. "And now they're coming for you?" "Not just for me," Marcus corrected. "For all of us, because of what happened in that alley." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. For the first time, the gang truly understood the gravity of their predicament. This wasn't just about saving themselves. It was about stopping a force that thrived on fear and intimidation. And if they failed, the consequences would ripple far beyond their small town. Over the next week, Marcus and the gang worked tirelessly to gather intelligence. They started by tracking the strangers who had arrived in town, the enforcers sent by the organization. These men stuck out like sore thumbs, driving expensive cars and wearing suits that screamed authority. They asked pointed questions at local bars, convenience stores, and even the mechanic shop where Marcus worked. Their presence unsettled the townsfolk, who whispered about them behind closed doors. Using old connections and sheer ingenuity, Marcus managed to piece together fragments of information. He discovered that the enforcers were staying at a motel on the outskirts of town, using it as a base of operations. From there, they coordinated their search for Marcus, employing both intimidation and bribery to get results. One night, Marcus and the gang staked out the motel, hiding in the shadows as they observed the comings and goings of the enforcers. It was risky, but necessary. They needed to learn everything they could before making their next move. During these stakeouts, Marcus noticed something unsettling. The enforcers weren't just looking for him. They were gathering intel on the entire town, mapping out potential weaknesses and vulnerabilities. It became clear that the organization saw this quiet community as fertile ground for expansion. If Marcus didn't act quickly, the gang's betrayal would be the least of the town's problems. "We can't let them take over," Marcus told the gang during one of their late-night meetings. "If we do, no one will be safe." "But how do we stop them?" Kyle asked, his voice tinged with desperation. "There's only 5 of us, and they've got guns, money, and backup." Marcus nodded grimly. "That's why we don't fight fair. We hit them where it hurts, their reputation. Expose them to the authorities, show the world what they really are." The plan was risky, bordering on suicidal, but Marcus had no choice. He instructed the gang to document every detail they could find: photos of the enforcers, license plate, numbers, conversations overheard in public places, anything that could tie the organization to illegal activities. In the meantime, Marcus reached out to an old acquaintance, someone he trusted implicitly, despite the years that had passed since their last meeting. Her name was Elena Cruz, a journalist known for her investigative work exposing corruption and organized crime. Years ago, she had helped Marcus escape the organization, risking her own life in the process. Though they hadn't spoken since, Marcus hoped she would answer his call. To his relief, she did. "I heard rumors you were back in town," Elena said dryly when they met in a secluded park. Her sharp eyes scanned the area, ensuring they weren't being watched. "Looks like trouble found you again." "You could say that," Marcus admitted, handing her a folder filled with the evidence they'd collected so far. "I need your help to bring them down, for good this time." Elena studied the documents carefully, her expression growing increasingly grave. When she finished, she looked up at Marcus, her gaze piercing. "This is big. Bigger than anything I've tackled before. Are you sure you're ready for what comes next?" Marcus didn't hesitate. I have to be. As the pieces fell into place, tensions in the town continued to rise. The enforcers grew more aggressive, their patience wearing thin. They began targeting local businesses, threatening owners who refused to cooperate. Fear spread like wildfire, turning neighbors against each other as people scrambled to protect themselves. Marcus watched it all unfold with a heavy heart, knowing he was partly responsible for bringing this nightmare to his adopted home. One afternoon, while working at the garage, Marcus received a chilling message. A customer handed him a folded note along with payment for a repair job. The note contained a single sentence: "Meet us at the warehouse tonight, or watch the town burn." Marcus clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. He recognized the handwriting immediately. It belonged to Victor Kane, the organization's most feared enforcer and the man who had recruited Marcus years ago. Victor was cunning, relentless, and utterly devoid of mercy. Facing him meant stepping into the lion's den, but ignoring the summons wasn't an option either. That evening, Marcus gathered the gang in his apartment for a final briefing. He laid out the plan in painstaking detail, emphasizing the importance of timing and coordination. "This is our only shot," he said, his voice firm. "Stick to the plan and we might actually pull this off, but if anything goes wrong, don't wait for me. Get out and warn the town." Kyle frowned, shaking his head. "We're not leaving you behind." "Yes, you are," Marcus replied, his tone brooking no argument. "This isn't about revenge or bravery, it's about stopping them, do you understand?" Reluctantly, the gang nodded. They knew Marcus was right, but that didn't make it any easier. As they left to take their positions, Marcus felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. For the first time in years, he embraced the weight of his past, not as a burden, but as a weapon. Whatever happened next, he was ready. The abandoned warehouse loomed ahead, its silhouette stark against the moonlit sky. Marcus approached cautiously, his footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust covering the ground. Inside, shadows danced across the walls, cast by flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. The air smelled of rust and decay, a fitting backdrop for the confrontation to come. Victor was waiting for him, flanked by several armed men, his cold eyes locked onto Marcus, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "I always knew you'd come back," Victor said, his voice smooth as silk. "Men like us don't change." Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "Maybe not, but I'm done running." What followed was a battle of wits and wills, culminating in a dramatic showdown that tested every ounce of Marcus's courage and resolve. With the gang's help, and Elena's timely intervention, they managed to expose the organization's crimes, turning the tables on their oppressors. By dawn, the warehouse was surrounded by police cars, sirens blaring as officers arrested the enforcers one by one. Though victorious, Marcus knew the scars of this fight would linger, for him, for the gang, and for the town. But as he stood outside the warehouse, watching the sunrise paint the horizon in hues of gold and crimson, he allowed himself a moment of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, this was the beginning of a new chapter. The abandoned warehouse was eerily silent as Marcus stepped inside, his every movement deliberate and cautious. The flickering fluorescent lights cast long, distorted shadows across the cracked concrete floor, creating an atmosphere that felt almost surreal. Each step echoed loudly, breaking the oppressive quiet and drawing the attention of those waiting within. Victor Kane stood at the far end of the vast space, flanked by half a dozen armed men who looked like they hadn't slept in days. Their faces were grim, their eyes sharp and predatory. They weren't here to negotiate, they were here to intimidate. Victor's presence dominated the room. Dressed in a sleek black suit, he exuded authority and menace, his posture relaxed yet commanding. His cold, calculating gaze locked onto Marcus, studying him as if trying to decipher how much of the man before him had changed over the years. A cruel smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "Marcus," he said smoothly, his voice dripping with mockery. "You haven't aged well." Marcus ignored the jab, keeping his expression neutral. He stopped a few feet away from Victor, ensuring there was enough distance between them to react if things turned violent, which they inevitably would. "Cut the games, Victor," Marcus replied evenly. "What do you want?" Victor chuckled, though there was no humor in it. Still direct as ever. "I see prison hasn't softened you." He gestured lazily toward the men surrounding him. "We came for answers. And maybe a little revenge. Imagine my surprise when I heard rumors about you being alive and cozy in this little town." "I'm not hiding," Marcus shot back, his tone firm. "And I'm done running." Victor raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by Marcus's defiance. Bold words for someone standing alone. "Did you really think coming here unarmed was wise?" He paused, leaning slightly forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Or are you hoping we'll let you walk out of here alive so you can keep playing hero?" Marcus clenched his jaw but didn't respond. He knew better than to rise to Victor's taunts. This wasn't just about physical strength, it was a battle of wits. Every word Victor spoke was designed to unsettle him, to make him doubt himself. But Marcus had spent years preparing for moments like this, moments where fear could either paralyze or propel him. And tonight, he chose to stand his ground. Outside the warehouse, the gang waited anxiously in their designated positions. Kyle, Rick, and the others crouched behind rusted shipping containers, their nerves stretched taut like piano strings. Despite Marcus's instructions, none of them felt comfortable staying on the sidelines while he faced such overwhelming odds. Kyle especially wrestled with guilt, replaying the night of the alley attack in his mind. He had been the one to lead the charge against Marcus, driven by blind hatred and ignorance. Now he found himself fighting alongside him, risking his life to protect the same man he'd once tried to destroy. "We should go in," Kyle muttered under his breath, gripping the crowbar he'd brought as a makeshift weapon. "He can't handle all of them by himself." Rick shook his head firmly. "No. Marcus gave us a job to do and we're sticking to it. If we mess this up, it's over. For everyone." Kyle opened his mouth to argue, but a sudden commotion inside the warehouse silenced him. Shouts erupted, followed by the sound of scuffling and heavy footsteps. The gang exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to intervene or hold their position. Then, just as panic began to set in, Elena Cruz appeared out of nowhere, her camera slung around her neck and determination etched into her features. "You guys ready?" she asked briskly, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. She held up her phone, displaying a live video feed showing police cars converging on the area. "Help is almost here. Stick to the plan and we'll get through this." Her confidence bolstered the gang's resolve. They nodded, tightening their grips on whatever weapons they carried and steeling themselves for what was to come. Inside, however, Marcus was already knee-deep in chaos. Back in the warehouse, the confrontation had escalated quickly. One of Victor's men lunged at Marcus, attempting to overpower him with sheer brute force. Marcus sidestepped the attack, using the attacker's momentum against him and sending him crashing to the ground. Another man charged forward, swinging a metal pipe wildly. Marcus ducked under the blow, grabbing the pipe mid-swing and yanking it free. With a swift motion, he struck the man across the chest, knocking him backward. Victor watched the skirmish unfold with detached amusement, seemingly unconcerned about the outcome. His men were expendable. Their sole purpose was to wear Marcus down until he made a mistake. But Marcus refused to falter. Years of survival had taught him how to fight dirty, how to turn even the smallest advantage into a victory. He moved with precision, conserving his energy while exploiting the weaknesses of his opponents. "Enough!" Victor barked suddenly, raising a hand to halt the assault. His men hesitated, retreating slightly as their leader stepped forward. "You've always been resourceful, Marcus," Victor admitted, his tone laced with begrudging respect. "But bravery alone won't save you now." Marcus straightened, breathing heavily but still alert. "Maybe not," he conceded. "But it buys me time." Victor smirked, pulling a small device from his pocket. It looked like a remote control, its buttons glowing faintly in the dim light. "Time won't matter once I press this button," he said casually. "You remember our old friend, don't you? The one who helped you escape last time?" Marcus froze, realization dawning on his face. The device was connected to explosives planted throughout the town, a fail-safe Victor had prepared in case negotiations failed. If triggered, it would devastate the entire community, killing hundreds of innocent people. "You wouldn't dare," Marcus growled, his voice low and dangerous. Victor shrugged nonchalantly. "Try me." For a moment, the air seemed to freeze. Marcus's mind raced, searching for a way out of this impossible situation. Taking Victor down physically wouldn't be enough, not when the threat extended beyond the walls of the warehouse. He needed leverage, something to tip the scales in his favor. That's when he noticed it, a flicker of uncertainty in Victor's eyes. No matter how confident he appeared, Victor was human, and humans made mistakes. Summoning every ounce of courage, Marcus took a bold step forward. "If you press that button, you'll lose everything," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Your reputation, your network, it'll all crumble. Because I've already sent proof of your crimes to the authorities. By morning, the whole world will know what you've done." Victor's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of doubt. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Marcus countered, meeting Victor's gaze without flinching. "Ask yourself this. Why else would I walk into a trap like this? Do you really think I'd risk my life and the lives of everyone in this town without having a backup plan?" Victor hesitated, his fingers hovering over the remote. For the first time, uncertainty clouded his judgment. He glanced at his men, seeking reassurance, but their expressions mirrored his own unease. Outside, the distant wail of sirens grew louder, signaling the arrival of law enforcement. Elena's timing couldn't have been more perfect. Realizing he was cornered, Victor cursed under his breath and tossed the remote aside. "Fine," he spat, raising his hands in surrender as the police stormed the warehouse. "You win. For now." As officers swarmed the scene, cuffing Victor and his men, Marcus allowed himself a brief moment of relief. The immediate danger had passed, but he knew the fight wasn't truly over. The organization's roots ran deep, and dismantling it entirely would take time and effort. Still, for the first time in years, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, justice could prevail. Later that night, as the sun began to rise over the horizon, Marcus joined the gang outside the warehouse. They were battered and bruised but alive, their bond strengthened by the ordeal they had endured together. Kyle approached Marcus hesitantly, his head bowed in shame. "I'm sorry," Kyle said quietly, his voice thick with emotion, "for everything." Marcus placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Apologies don't change the past," he replied gently. "But actions can shape the future. Let's focus on making sure this never happens again." As the group dispersed, Marcus lingered for a moment, watching the first rays of sunlight illuminate the sky. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time. The aftermath of the warehouse showdown rippled through the town like waves on a still pond. For weeks, the streets buzzed with whispers and speculation as news of the arrests spread. People pieced together fragments of the story, rumors of a gang leader turning against his own, a mysterious tattoo that struck fear into hardened criminals, and a mechanic who had somehow outsmarted one of the most dangerous organizations in the country. The truth was murkier than anyone could have guessed, but one thing was undeniable. The quiet little town would never be the same again. Marcus Johnson became an unlikely hero overnight. Neighbors who once exchanged polite nods with him now stopped to shake his hand or offer heartfelt thanks. Strangers approached him at the mechanic shop, eager to hear his side of the story. Some even called him brave, though Marcus didn't see himself that way. To him, bravery wasn't about facing danger head-on. It was about making choices, no matter how hard they were. And those choices had come at a cost. Physically, Marcus was battered, but healing. His bruises faded slowly, leaving faint marks that served as reminders of the fight he'd endured. Emotionally, however, the scars ran deeper. He replayed the events of that night over and over in his mind, the tension, the violence, the split-second decisions that had determined whether he lived or died. But what weighed on him most was the realization that his past couldn't stay buried forever. No matter how far he ran or how hard he tried to start anew, the serpent and dagger tattoo would always be a part of him. It wasn't just ink, it was a legacy, one he would carry for the rest of his life. Despite the chaos, the town began to heal. The presence of law enforcement brought a sense of security that had been missing for years. Officers patrolled the streets regularly, their presence deterring anyone who might consider causing trouble. Local businesses reopened their doors, free from the threats that had plagued them during the organization's brief reign of terror. Even the gang members once feared and reviled found themselves welcomed back into the community, not as heroes but as people willing to change. Kyle and his crew struggled to adjust to their new reality. They attended counseling sessions arranged by the town council, grappling with guilt and regret for their past actions. At first, Kyle resisted, convinced that redemption was impossible. But Marcus visited him often, offering guidance and encouragement. "You can't undo what you've done," Marcus told him one afternoon, sitting across from him in a small cafe. "But you can choose how you move forward. That's all any of us can do." Slowly, Kyle began to open up, sharing his fears and frustrations with Marcus. Over time, their uneasy alliance transformed into something resembling friendship. For Marcus, it was proof that even the hardest hearts could soften given the right circumstances. As for Kyle, he vowed to make amends, starting with volunteering at a local youth center to steer kids away from gangs and violence. Elena Cruz returned to her work as a journalist, filing explosive reports that exposed the inner workings of the organization. Her articles sent shockwaves across the nation, prompting investigations into other towns where the group had operated undetected. She credited Marcus for providing the evidence that made her expose possible, though she knew it had come at great personal risk. When she thanked him during a phone call, Marcus simply shrugged off the praise. "I didn't do it for recognition," he said honestly. "I did it because it was the right thing to do." Elena chuckled softly. "You're a rare breed, Marcus. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Though their paths diverged after the investigation, Elena kept in touch, occasionally sending updates about her progress. She promised to visit the town again someday, though Marcus suspected it would take more than promises to bring her back. Their connection, forged in the crucible of danger, remained strong despite the distance between them. As weeks turned into months, Marcus settled into a routine that felt almost normal. He worked long hours at the garage, fixing cars and chatting with customers. On weekends, he joined neighbors for barbecues and community events, savoring the camaraderie he had once taken for granted. Yet, beneath the surface, he remained vigilant. He knew better than to assume the organization was completely gone. Its leaders might have been arrested, but its influence lingered, waiting for an opportunity to resurface. One evening, as Marcus sat on the porch of his apartment, sipping a cup of coffee and watching the sun dip below the horizon, he reflected on everything that had happened. The attack in the alley, the gang's betrayal turned alliance, the confrontation in the warehouse, it all felt surreal, like scenes from someone else's life. Yet every scar on his body reminded him that it was real. Every smile from a neighbor reinforced the belief that change was possible, even in the face of overwhelming odds. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Opening it, he found Kyle standing there holding a toolbox. "Thought I'd help you with that leaky faucet upstairs," Kyle said awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. "Figured it's the least I can do." Marcus smiled, stepping aside to let him in. "Appreciate it," he replied. "But next time, bring beer too. Fixing pipes is thirsty work." They spent the evening working side by side, their laughter echoing through the apartment. It was a simple moment, unremarkable in many ways, but to Marcus it symbolized hope. Hope that forgiveness could replace hatred, that trust could overcome betrayal, and that even the darkest chapters could lead to brighter beginnings. In the end, Marcus understood that his journey wasn't about erasing his past. It was about embracing it, learning from it, and using it to create something meaningful. The tattoo on his arm remained a constant reminder of where he'd been, but it no longer defined him. Instead, he chose to define himself, not as a victim, not as a fighter, but as a man committed to doing what was right, no matter the cost. And so, as the town continued to rebuild and grow, Marcus stood tall, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. He didn't know what the future held, but he was certain of one thing: he wouldn't face it alone. Together they had proven that unity could triumph over division, that courage could conquer fear, and that redemption was always within reach. For those willing to fight for it. Under the starlit sky, Marcus felt a profound sense of peace. The road had been long and arduous, filled with pain and sacrifice. But as he looked around at the people he had fought alongside, the friends he had gained and the lives he had touched, he knew it had been worth it. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe in a brighter tomorrow. And in that belief, he found strength.